My name is Eden, and I'm 23 years old, a recent college graduate with big dreams of starting my own photography business. Since I was little, my grandparents promised me financial security through a $20,000 trust fund they set up for my future. I never imagined my parents would betray me so completely. While I was working hard in college, they were secretly emptying my account to fund my sister Amanda's modeling career. The day I walked into that bank expecting to start my life, everything changed forever. Before I tell you how I discovered my trust fund was empty, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by family members. Trust me, what happened next will shock you. I grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Westbrook, Pennsylvania, with perfectly trimmed lawns and families who seemed normal on the surface. My parents, Daniel and Karen Wright, always provided us with what we needed, but there was never any extravagance in our household. At least, not for me. From the time I was 12, photography became my escape and my passion. My grandfather noticed my interest and gave me my first real camera for my birthday that year. It was nothing fancy, just a basic digital camera, but I treasured it like it was professional equipment. I spent hours taking photos of everything around our neighborhood, fascinated by how the right angle could transform something ordinary into something beautiful. My grandparents, Thomas and Eleanor, were always my biggest supporters. They attended every school art show where my photos were displayed, praised my developing skills, and most importantly, believed in my future. When I was 14, they sat me down and told me about the trust fund they had established for me. Eden, we've set aside $20,000 for you, Grandpa Thomas explained with his gentle smile. You'll be able to access it when you turn 21. It's for your education, or to help you start that photography business you're always talking about. The rules were simple but specific. The money would be held until I turned 21. It could only be used for educational purposes or for establishing a legitimate business. My parents were named as co-trustees, but the money was explicitly designated for my future. I remember how secure it made me feel, knowing that no matter what, I would have a foundation to build my dreams upon. Meanwhile, my younger sister Amanda was on a completely different path. From age 5, she was enrolled in children's beauty pageants. With her naturally blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and outgoing personality, she quickly became my parents' pride and joy. Every weekend was devoted to competitions, coaching sessions, and shopping for the perfect outfits. The family dynamics were clear to anyone who spent more than an hour in our home. Amanda was the golden child, the one with the special talent that my parents believed would someday make our family name known. I was the practical, responsible one, whose passions were treated as nice hobbies, but nothing worth the investment they poured into Amanda. Your sister has a gift, Eden, my mother would say whenever I questioned the amount of time and money spent on pageants. When she gets discovered, it will change all our lives. I didn't resent Amanda for it. She was just a kid following our parents' lead, and in many ways, I felt sorry for the pressure placed on her shoulders. But I did resent the imbalance, the way my accomplishments were footnotes while hers were headline news in our family story. During high school, I focused on developing my skills. I took every photography class offered, joined the yearbook committee to gain experience, and even started a small business taking senior portraits for classmates. The money I earned went straight into my savings account, which I labeled Studio Fund in my banking app. When college time came, I was accepted into the visual arts program at Pennsylvania State University. My grandparents were thrilled, but my parents seemed distracted. Amanda, then 16, had just been signed by a local modeling agency, and they were convinced this was her big break. Isn't community college an option? My father suggested when we discussed tuition costs. Your sister's agency fees are quite significant right now. That was the first time I explicitly referenced my trust fund. I'll have my grandparents' money in a few years, Dad. I need the best education I can get now. He backed off, but looking back, I should have noticed the calculated look that passed between my parents. College was transformative for me. Away from the shadow of Amanda's pageant trophies, I flourished. My professors praised my unique perspective, and I developed a style focusing on authentic, unfiltered moments, rather than posed perfection. Perhaps a subconscious rejection of the pageant world that had dominated our home. I worked part-time at the campus coffee shop to cover my living expenses beyond tuition. Every dollar I saved brought me closer to my goal of opening a studio. I had it all planned out. I would graduate, access my trust fund, combine it with my savings, and rent a small commercial space in Philadelphia's Arts District. I researched equipment costs, created marketing plans, and even designed business cards during my final semester. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance I had envisioned. My grandparents attended, beaming with pride. My parents and Amanda came too, though they arrived late and left early for one of Amanda's casting calls. I didn't mind. I was too excited about the future. The following Monday, I scheduled an appointment with the trust fund manager at First National Bank. I had been planning this meeting for years, mentally calculating exactly how I would allocate the $20,000. $8,000 for studio space deposit and first quarter rent. $7,000 for professional equipment, $3,000 for website development and initial marketing, $2,000 as emergency operating funds. I fell asleep that night visualizing the studio space I had already toured twice, imagining my name on the door, Eden Wright Photography. After years of being the overlooked daughter, I was about to stand on my own 2 feet and build something that was entirely mine. The morning of my bank appointment, I dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer and pencil skirt that I had purchased specifically for professional meetings. I wanted to look the part of a serious business owner, someone worthy of investment and trust. The irony of that last thought still makes my stomach turn. The bank's trust department was located on the third floor, all polished wood and hushed conversations. Mr. Geller, the trust manager, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a formal manner that I found reassuring. He seemed like someone who took the rules of finance seriously. "Miss Wright, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I understand you're here about the Thomas and Eleanor Wright Trust?" "Yes," I replied, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "I turned 23 last month, and I'm ready to access the funds to start my photography business." He nodded and began typing on his computer. I remember noticing a family photo on his desk, a teenage daughter in a graduation gown, parents beaming proudly on either side of her. A normal family moment that I suddenly realized I'd never really had. "Let me pull up the account information," Mr. Geller said. He frowned slightly at his screen, then clicked a few more keys. The pause stretched uncomfortably long. "Is everything okay?" I asked, the first flutter of unease moving through my chest. "Miss Wright," he began, then cleared his throat. "The current balance in the trust account is $547.39. The words didn't make sense at first. I actually laughed, assuming there was some kind of mistake. "No, that's not possible," I said. "There should be $20,000 plus interest. My grandparents established the trust with that amount." Mr. Geller turned his monitor so I could see the screen. There it was in black and white, $547.39. "Could you check again? Maybe you're looking at the wrong account?" My voice had risen an octave. "I'm afraid not. This is definitely the Thomas and Eleanor Wright Trust, with you listed as the beneficiary. Your parents, Daniel and Karen Wright, are the co-trustees." He scrolled down the screen. "I can see that the original deposit was indeed $20,000 made 7 years ago, but there have been numerous withdrawals over the past 2 years." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Withdrawals? I didn't make any withdrawals. I couldn't access the money until I turned 21. "The withdrawals were authorized by the trustees, your parents." Mr. Geller explained, his voice taking on a gentler tone that somehow made everything worse. "As co-trustees, they had legal authority to manage the funds. But the money was for my education and business. That was the purpose of the trust. They couldn't just take it." Mr. Geller looked uncomfortable. "I can request an investigation into the withdrawals if you wish. There are certain fiduciary responsibilities that trustees must uphold." "Yes," I said, my hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I want to know exactly where my money went." The investigation took 3 days, during which I lived in a state of numb disbelief. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend Zoe. Some part of me hoped there would be an innocent explanation. When Mr. Geller called me back to his office, his expression told me everything before he spoke a word. He handed me a folder containing bank statements and withdrawal authorizations. The money was withdrawn in amounts ranging from $500 to $2,000 over 24 months, he explained. All withdrawals were authorized by either your father or mother, sometimes both using their authority as trustees. I flipped through the statements, my eyes catching phrases like educational expense and beneficiary need in the notes section. But these weren't for my education, I said. I had student loans. I worked part-time throughout college. They never gave me any of this money. Miss Wright, Mr. Geller said carefully, I would suggest you speak with your parents about this. If the funds were indeed misappropriated, you may want to consult with a lawyer who specializes in trust law. I left the bank with the folder clutched to my chest, feeling as though the ground beneath my feet had disappeared. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it all at once. Over and over, I kept thinking of the nights I'd worked double shifts at the coffee shop, coming home exhausted to study until dawn, all while my parents were systematically draining the money that was meant to secure my future. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, the folder of bank statements on the passenger seat beside me. It was Thursday, which meant family dinner, a tradition my mother insisted upon, despite the fact that I had moved into my own apartment after graduation. Amanda's car was already in the driveway, a new model Volkswagen that my parents had helped her finance for castings. The familiar smell of my mother's lasagna filled the house, and for a brief, disorienting moment, everything felt normal. My father was watching television in the living room, my mother was arranging garlic bread on a platter, and Amanda was showing someone's Instagram profile on her phone. Eden? My mother called. Perfect timing, dinner's almost ready. I placed the folder on the dining room table. We need to talk. Now. Something in my voice made even Amanda look up from her phone. My father muted the TV and joined us in the dining room, eyebrows raised in question. What's this about? He asked, glancing at the folder. My trust fund? I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The one that now has $547 in it instead of $20,000. The silence that followed was damning. Not confusion, not denial, but the heavy silence of people caught in a lie they hadn't expected to face. Honey, my mother finally said, placing the garlic bread on the table as if we were still going to have a normal dinner, we were going to talk to you about that. Really, when, after I went to the bank and found out myself, my father sighed and took a seat at the table. Eden, you have to understand, your sister's career needed investment. The pageant circuit only gets you so far. Professional modeling requires professional development, professional photos, professional everything. So you stole my money? The words hung in the air, harsh and undeniable. We didn't steal anything, my mother interjected. We're your parents. We made a decision about what was best for the family. I opened the folder and spread the statements across the table. $3,000 for professional portfolio development, $2,000 for industry networking event, and the $1,500 for career wardrobe essentials. These were all for Amanda, weren't they? Amanda looked up, confusion crossing her face. What are you talking about? Your modeling career, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. The one Mom and Dad funded with the money that was meant for my future. My sister's eyes widened. They said those expenses were coming from their savings. Apparently not. They've been emptying my trust fund for 2 years. My father leaned forward. Eden, try to see the bigger picture. Amanda's career is an investment in all our futures. When she makes it big, we'll all benefit. We can pay back your trust fund tenfold. That's not your decision to make. The money was for my education and my business. Grandma and Grandpa set it up specifically for me. And you got your education, didn't you? My mother said, her voice hardening. You have your degree. Amanda needs this opportunity now while she's young enough to break into the industry. The casual way they justified their betrayal was more shocking than the act itself. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the breach of trust. In their minds, taking my future to gamble on Amanda's was perfectly reasonable. How much has she earned so far from all these investments? I asked. My parents exchanged glances. It takes time to build a modeling career, my father said defensively. She's making connections, building her portfolio. So nothing, I translated. You've spent nearly $20,000 and she hasn't earned a penny. That's not fair, Amanda protested. I'm working really hard. The agency says I have real potential. I turned to her, and for the first time I let myself feel angry at her too. Did you know where the money was coming from? She looked down at her plate. I knew they were spending a lot. I didn't know it was your trust fund. Whether I believed her or not didn't matter at that moment. The betrayal belonged primarily to my parents, who had been entrusted with protecting my interests and had chosen to sacrifice them instead. I'm going to get that money back, I said, gathering the statements and returning them to the folder. All of it. Don't be dramatic, my mother said. What are you going to do, sue your own parents? The question was meant to make me back down, to make me feel unreasonable. But as I looked at these people who had so casually stolen my future, I realized I didn't recognize them anymore. If that's what it takes, I replied, standing up. I trusted you. Grandma and Grandpa trusted you. And you threw that away for what? So Amanda could play model for a few years. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. Eden, you're overreacting. Family helps family. This was for all of us. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. No, Dad. This was for Amanda. It's always been for Amanda. But this time you went too far. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and rage. By the time I pulled into my parking space, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, I would never trust my parents again. And second, I would fight with everything I had to get back what was rightfully mine. The days following that confrontation were some of the hardest of my life. I called in sick to my post-graduation job at a local portrait studio and spent most of the time lying on my bed, alternating between crying and researching trust law on my laptop. My small apartment, which I shared with my college friend Zoe, had always felt like a stepping stone, a temporary space before I moved into something better after starting my business. Now it felt like a reminder of all my delayed dreams. You need to get out of this room, Zoe said on the third day, pulling open the curtains to let sunlight stream in. And you need to call your grandparents. They should know what happened. I hadn't told my grandparents yet, partly out of shame, partly because I knew it would break their hearts. They had established the trust out of love for me, and learning how their own son had betrayed that trust would devastate them. I can't face them yet, I said. Not until I have a plan. The next day, I packed up my few belongings and officially moved out of my parents' house. Zoe helped me load boxes into my car while my parents were at work. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a note that simply said, I'll be in touch through my lawyer. I didn't have a lawyer yet, and I certainly couldn't afford one, but they didn't need to know that. My parents' reaction was swift and predictable. First came the texts, "You're being childish. We need to talk this through as a family. This isn't something to throw away your family over." When I didn't respond, the phone call started. I let them go to voicemail, but each message was more desperate and manipulative than the last. Eden, this is your mother. I know you're upset, but you need to remember everything we've done for you over the years, the sacrifices we've made. This wasn't just about Amanda, it was about creating opportunities for all of us. Eden, it's Dad. Your mother is very upset. You know how she gets. Please, call us back so we can work this out. Family should always come first. The subtext was clear. I should forgive them because they were family. I should understand that Amanda's needs were more important than mine, because that's how it had always been. A week after the confrontation, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Jennifer, my father's sister. We had always been close, but she lived in Colorado, so our contact was mainly on holidays and birthdays. Eden, it's Aunt Jen. Your dad called me with some story about you overreacting to financial decisions they made. What's really going on? I broke down as soon as I heard her voice telling her everything from the empty trust fund to my parents' unapologetic justifications. Those fools, she muttered when I finished. Your father always did think the rules didn't apply to him. Listen, Eden, I work in banking. What they did isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable. If they were trustees of a fund earmarked for specific purposes, they had a fiduciary duty to manage it according to those terms. What should I do? I asked. I can't afford a lawyer. First, you need documentation. Everything. Bank statements, the original trust agreement, any communications about the trust. I'll help you put together a file. And there are legal aid services that might take your case, especially if there's evidence they forged your signature on anything. That comment stopped me short. What do you mean, forged my signature? For some withdrawals from trusts, especially larger ones, they might have needed the beneficiary's approval. It depends on how the trust was structured. Did you ever sign anything related to the trust fund? No, never. Then we should look into that possibility. Over the next few days, Aunt Jennifer became my unexpected ally. She helped me request copies of all documents related to the trust and guided me through filing a formal complaint with the bank's fraud department. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their campaign. They started calling my friends, telling them I was having some kind of breakdown. They even showed up at my workplace, causing such a scene that my manager took me aside afterward to ask if I needed help. The worst part was when they enlisted my grandparents. I received a call from my grandfather, his voice wavering with concern. Eden, your parents say you're very upset about the trust fund. They mentioned you've moved out and are threatening legal action. Grandpa, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, did they tell you that they spent almost all of the money, that there's only $500 left? The silence on the other end told me everything. No, he finally said. They said there was a misunderstanding about how the money was being allocated. They spent it on Amanda's modeling career, Grandpa. Classes, photo shoots, clothes, travel to casting calls. The money you set aside for my education and business is gone. I heard him talking to my grandmother in the background, their voices muffled but clearly distressed. When he came back on the line, his voice had changed, hardened in a way I'd never heard before. We'll get to the bottom of this, Eden. Your grandmother and I set up that trust with very specific instructions. If Daniel and Karen violated those, there will be consequences. That call was both painful and validating. Painful, because I hated being the bearer of bad news to my grandparents. Validating, because finally, someone believed me without question. The next day, Aunt Jennifer called with surprising news. Eden, I spoke with a friend who works in trust law. She's willing to look at your case on contingency. That means you don't pay unless you win. Why would she do that? I asked. It can't be that much money to her. Because what your parents did appears to be a clear breach of fiduciary duty, and those cases are pretty straightforward. Plus, she said if there's forgery involved, it becomes more serious. 2 days later, I was sitting in the office of Marissa Goldstein, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in trust disputes. She reviewed the documents I'd gathered and asked pointed questions about the trust structure and my parents' actions. The good news, if you can call it that, she said after our discussion, is that this is a textbook case of trustees violating their duties. The trust was clearly established for your education and business purposes. They can't just decide to reallocate it to your sister's modeling career. So I can get the money back. We'll certainly try, and there's more. I've looked at the withdrawal authorizations, and 3 of them have your signature on them authorizing the reallocation of funds. She turned her computer monitor so I could see the scanned documents. There at the bottom of each form was what appeared to be my signature. I never signed these, I said, anger rising again. I didn't even know about the withdrawals. I suspected as much, Marissa said. The signatures are similar, but not identical to your actual signature on your driver's license and other documents. That changes things significantly. Forgery elevates this from a civil breach of duty to potential fraud. As I left Marissa's office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that I had professional help, vindication that someone in authority recognized the wrong done to me, but also profound sadness that my relationship with my parents had deteriorated to this point. That evening, I received a text from Amanda. Can we talk? Just the 2 of us? I hesitated, unsure if this was another ploy orchestrated by my parents. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop the next day. Amanda arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued without her usual perfect makeup and styled hair. She ordered a simple coffee and sat across from me, fidgeting with the cardboard sleeve. I didn't know it was your trust fund, she said without preamble. I swear, Eden. They told me they were investing in my career from their savings. Dad said it was like my college fund since I wasn't going to college. Would it have made a difference if you'd known? I asked. She looked down. I don't know, I'd like to think so, but they were so excited about every opportunity, every casting call. It felt like I couldn't say no even when I wanted to. Did you want to say no? Amanda's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes. A lot of times, actually. Do you know how exhausting it is to always be on display? To have your body scrutinized constantly? But every time I mentioned taking a break, Mom would talk about all the money they'd invested, how I couldn't waste their sacrifice. For the first time, I saw Amanda as another victim of our parents' obsessions, albeit a more privileged one. While I'd been ignored, she'd been weaponized, turned into a vehicle for their ambitions. I'm not dropping the legal case, I said firmly. What they did was wrong, and I'm going to fight to get my money back. I know, she nodded. And I think you should. I found something you might need. She pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. Inside was a bank statement I hadn't seen before, showing a $5,000 withdrawal with my forged signature, along with an email from my father to the modeling agency, mentioning that the funds were coming from Eden's account, but she's happy to support her sister's career. Where did you get this? I asked, stunned by the explicit admission. Dad's home office. He wasn't very careful about locking his desk drawer. She gave a small, sad smile. I guess he didn't expect his golden child to betray him. With Amanda's evidence and Aunt Jennifer's support, I felt stronger. But my sleepless nights continued, filled with anxiety about confronting my parents in court and the knowledge that our family would never be the same again. The legal action I was about to take would burn bridges that might never be rebuilt. But as I looked at the forged signatures and thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts while my parents drained my future, I knew I had no choice but to follow through. Armed with Marissa's expertise and the evidence Amanda had provided, I took the next step in reclaiming what was rightfully mine. We began by freezing what little remained in the trust account to prevent any further withdrawals. Marissa also advised me to open a new personal account at a different bank, just in case my parents had access to my existing accounts. We need to document everything, Marissa explained as we prepared our case. Bank statements, emails, text messages, conversations you remember, anything that shows they knew they were misusing the funds. I spent days combing through old emails and text messages, finding scattered references to my trust fund and Amanda's modeling expenses. Most damning was a text from my father to my mother that Amanda had forwarded to me, used another $2K from E's fund for A's new portfolio shoot. We'll need to be careful about timing of next withdrawal. Marissa helped me draft a formal legal notice demanding a full accounting of all trust fund withdrawals and repayment of misappropriated funds. The letter, printed on her firm's letterhead and filled with legal terminology, was sent via certified mail to my parents' home. This is your last chance to resolve this before we escalate to court, Marissa explained. Sometimes the shock of formal legal action is enough to bring people to their senses. 3 days after the letter was delivered, my phone exploded with calls and texts from both parents. I let them go to voicemail following Marissa's advice not to engage directly without her present. The messages ranged from enraged to tearful. "How dare you send lawyers after your own family?" my father shouted in one message. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." "Eden, please," my mother pleaded in another. "We can work this out between us. There's no need to involve strangers in family matters." The most unsettling was my father's final message. "If you go through with this, you're no longer our daughter. Think carefully about what you're throwing away here." I played the messages for Marissa during our next meeting, my hands shaking despite my resolve. "This is textbook emotional manipulation," she said calmly. "They're trying to make you feel guilty for holding them accountable. Stand firm. You've done nothing wrong here." While my parents were mounting their defense, I received an unexpected call from the modeling agency that had been working with Amanda. A representative named Sophia wanted to meet with me regarding recent developments. Marissa accompanied me to that meeting where Sophia nervously explained that the agency had become aware of the potential legal issues surrounding Amanda's funding. "We want to be clear that we had no knowledge of any impropriety in how Miss Wright's career was being financed," Sophia said, glancing at a man I assumed was their lawyer. "Our contracts were all with your parents, and they represented the funds as family investments." "Yet you accepted payments that were explicitly drawn from a trust fund in my name," I pointed out. Did that never strike you as unusual? Sophia shifted uncomfortably. We don't typically investigate the source of clients' funding. However, in light of the situation, we're prepared to discuss potential remedies. What they were really saying was that they didn't want to be named as co-defendants in a lawsuit that might generate negative publicity. Marissa seized on their discomfort, suggesting that the agency could demonstrate their good faith by refunding certain fees that could be proven to have come directly from my trust fund. We'll need to discuss this with our legal team, Sophia replied. But I could tell they were seriously considering it. As word of the legal action spread through our extended family, people began taking sides. Most of my relatives seemed shocked by my parents' actions, but a few considered me selfish for making such a fuss over money and potentially damaging Amanda's career. Aunt Jennifer remained my staunchest ally, even flying in from Colorado to stay with me for a week. She helped me prepare for the mediation session Marissa had scheduled as a last attempt to resolve the matter before going to court. Remember, Aunt Jennifer coached me the night before. They're going to try to make this about family loyalty. Don't let them. This is about broken trust and legal responsibility. Stay focused on the facts. The mediation took place in a sterile conference room at Marissa's law office. My parents arrived with their own lawyer, a college friend of my father's named Richard, who specialized in real estate law but was apparently doing them a favor. Amanda came too, sitting slightly apart from my parents, with an expression of guarded neutrality. The mediator, a retired judge named Patricia Coleman, began by explaining the process and reminding everyone that mediation was an attempt to find resolution without the expense and emotional toll of a court case. My parents looked confident at first, clearly expecting that family pressure would make me back down. My father spoke first, portraying their action as well-intentioned family financial management. "We've always tried to do what's best for both our daughters," he said smoothly. The trust fund was indeed established for Eden's future, but as parents, we saw an opportunity to make a better investment in Amanda's career, which would benefit the entire family in the long run. "Did the trust document give you that discretion?" Judge Coleman asked. My father hesitated. "Well, it specified education and business purposes, but we viewed Amanda's career as a family business venture." Marissa interjected. "The trust explicitly named Eden as the sole beneficiary with funds designated for her education and her business endeavors. There was no provision for reallocating to another child or to a family business." My mother leaned forward. "Eden has always been the practical one, the one who could take care of herself. Amanda needed the extra support to develop her special talent." "So you decided that one daughter's future was more valuable than the other's?" Marissa asked. "We never saw it that way," my mother protested. "We were making an investment decision." "An investment that has yielded what returns exactly?" Judge Coleman inquired. My parents exchanged glances. "Amanda has made valuable industry connections," my father said. "She's being considered for several significant opportunities." It was Amanda who broke the facade. "No, I'm not," she said quietly. "The agency dropped me last month. They said I didn't have the unique look they were seeking for their current clients." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. My parents looked stunned. "You were dropped. Why didn't you tell us?" my mother demanded. "Because I knew you'd be disappointed," Amanda replied, her voice stronger now. "You've been living through my modeling for years, and I didn't know how to tell you it wasn't working out. I've been going to casting calls that were actually job interviews for retail positions." The mediator used this moment to suggest a short break. As we filed out of the room, I saw my father pull Amanda aside, his face flushed with anger. Marissa steered me toward a private office where we could regroup. "This is going better than expected," she said. "Amanda's revelation undermines their whole investment argument, and I think the judge can see the family dynamics at play here." When we reconvened, the mood had shifted palpably. My father seemed deflated while my mother had a new desperate energy. "There's something else you should know," she said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Not all of the money went to Amanda's career." "Karen," my father warned, but she continued. "Some of it went to other expenses. Our anniversary trip to Bermuda last year, the down payment on Daniel's new car." She looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Eden. We told ourselves it was just borrowing, that we'd pay it back when Amanda started earning. I felt physically ill. It was bad enough thinking they had favored Amanda, but to learn they had spent my future on their own luxuries was almost too much to bear. "You stole from me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not for Amanda, for yourselves. We're your parents," my father said, but the words sounded hollow even to him now. "Everything we have is family money." "No," I said, finding my strength. "The trust wasn't family money. It was my money given to me by my grandparents for my future. You were entrusted to protect it, not spend it on vacations and cars." I turned to the mediator. "I've heard enough. I want to proceed with the lawsuit, and I want to add charges of forgery for the documents where they faked my signature." Judge Coleman nodded gravely. "I understand. Before we conclude, does anyone have anything else to add that might help us find a resolution today?" Amanda raised her hand slightly. "I want to help make this right," she said. "I didn't know where the money was coming from, but I benefited from it. I have about $4,000 saved from modeling jobs and allowance. I want Eden to have it." My father's face darkened. "Amanda, you don't need to do that. This is between your mother and me and Eden." "No, Dad," she replied firmly. "This affects all of us. You always taught us about responsibility." "Well, I'm taking responsibility for my part in this." As the mediation concluded without resolution, Judge Coleman advised my parents to consider their position carefully. "The evidence of trust violation is quite clear," she said, "and if there is indeed forgery involved, that elevates the seriousness significantly. I strongly recommend you consider settlement options." In the parking lot afterward, my father made one last attempt to appeal to me. "Eden, please. We're still your parents. We made mistakes, but destroying your family over money isn't worth it." I looked at the man who had raised me, feeling both sadness and determination. "This isn't about money, Dad. It's about trust and respect. You had neither for me. And until you understand that we have nothing more to say to each other." The next day, Marissa filed the lawsuit on my behalf. The formal complaint alleged breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of trust funds, and forgery. We also named the modeling agency as a secondary defendant for knowingly accepting funds from a restricted trust. What I didn't expect was my father's next move. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, my mother called me in tears. "Your father's gone," she sobbed. "He emptied our joint account and left. There was a note saying he couldn't face the scandal. What am I going to do, Eden? How will I pay the mortgage?" I felt a cold certainty that this too was manipulation, another attempt to make me feel responsible for their problems. But when Amanda confirmed that our father had indeed disappeared, leaving my mother financially stranded, I realized this situation had spiraled beyond anything I had anticipated. The man who had lectured me about family loyalty had abandoned his wife rather than face the consequences of his actions. And despite everything, some small part of me still cared what happened to my mother. "I'll help her find a lawyer to protect her interests," I told Amanda. "But I'm not dropping the case. Dad's disappearance only proves he knew exactly what he was doing." As news of my father's departure spread, the family dynamic shifted once again. Relatives who had criticized me now directed their anger toward him. Even my grandparents, who had been devastated by the whole affair, rallied to support both my case and my mother's immediate needs. The lawsuit was proceeding, but the landscape had changed dramatically. With my father gone, the remaining players were reassessing their positions. And I found myself at the center of a family crisis I had never wanted, fighting for a principle that felt increasingly Pyrrhic. Yet I couldn't back down now. Too much had been revealed, too many trusts broken. The only path forward was through the legal process, wherever it might lead. The legal battle intensified after my father's disappearance. What had begun as a straightforward case of trust fund mismanagement became more complex as we tried to trace the missing money and deal with my father's absence. Court proceedings began with preliminary hearings where Marissa presented our evidence of trust violations. My mother, now represented by her own attorney, attempted to distance herself from my father's actions. "Mrs. Wright, the bank records show that you personally authorized 8 withdrawals from the trust fund," the judge pointed out during one hearing. "Are you claiming you were unaware of what these funds were being used for?" "Daniel handled our finances." My mother replied, her voice small. I signed what he asked me to sign. I didn't fully understand. It was hard to watch her portray herself as an unwitting victim when I had vivid memories of her enthusiastically planning Amanda's modeling expenditures. Yet there was also a kernel of truth to her claim. My father had always dominated family decisions, particularly financial ones. The discovery process revealed even more financial misconduct than I had initially suspected. In addition to the trust fund withdrawals, my parents had opened credit cards in my name when I turned 18, using my good credit score to finance additional expenses related to Amanda's career and their personal indulgences. This goes beyond breach of fiduciary duty, Marissa told me after reviewing the new evidence. This is identity theft. We can add that to the lawsuit or potentially pursue criminal charges. The thought of seeing my mother face criminal charges made me physically ill despite everything. Let's focus on recovering the money, I decided. I want justice, not revenge. Meanwhile, my mother's financial situation grew increasingly desperate. With my father gone and legal bills mounting, she faced possible foreclosure on the family home. Against all logic, I found myself concerned for her welfare. During a particularly difficult week, Amanda called me with an unexpected development. Mom wants to settle, she said. She can't keep fighting this case emotionally or financially. She's willing to admit fault and agree to a repayment plan. The offer came with conditions. My mother would sign a formal admission of wrongdoing and agree to repay the full amount over time using a portion of her teacher's salary and proceeds from selling certain assets. In exchange, I would drop the identity theft allegations and help her negotiate with the bank on the mortgage. Why should I trust her now? I asked Marissa when discussing the offer. She's lied to me for years. The settlement would include legally binding repayment terms, Marissa explained. And realistically, it may be your best chance to recover the funds. Your father is still missing, and litigation could drag on for years. While I was considering my mother's offer, the modeling agency reached out with their own settlement proposal. Facing potential liability for accepting misappropriated funds, they offered to refund 70% of the fees they had collected for Amanda's representation, approximately $8,000. They're calling it a professional courtesy refund, Marissa explained with a slight smile. Basically, they're returning the money without explicitly admitting wrongdoing. Is that their version of a chargeback? I asked, thinking of the thumbnail text that had precipitated this whole story. Essentially, yes. They realize they could face significant legal and publicity issues if we pursue this in court. Amanda had also made good on her promise to contribute her savings, adding another $4,000 to the recovery total. Between the agency's refund, Amanda's contribution, and my mother's repayment agreement, I would eventually recoup almost the entire $20,000, though it would take years to collect the full amount from my mother. The most surprising turn came when Amanda asked to testify against our father if the case went to trial. I need to do this, she told me over coffee one day. Not just for you, but for me. I need to break free from being their perfect doll. Amanda's decision to stand with me, rather than our parents, represented a seismic shift in our relationship. For the first time, we were allies rather than competitors in our parents' attention economy. As news of the case spread through legal circles and our community, I began receiving messages from other young adults who had experienced similar betrayals by trustee parents. Their stories varied in details, but shared the same core elements: parents who viewed their children's assets as family resources to be allocated at parental discretion, regardless of legal designations or children's wishes. A paralegal at Marissa's firm suggested I start a support group for trust fund victims. There's more of this going on than people realize, she said. Having a community could help others come forward and seek justice. The idea resonated with me. Perhaps some good could come from my painful experience, if it helped others recognize and address similar situations. As settlement negotiations progressed, we received word that my father had been located in Arizona, living under his middle name and working as a sales consultant. The local sheriff's department served him with papers related to the lawsuit, and his lawyer contacted Marissa the following day. He's willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity from criminal charges, Marissa reported. He claims he can demonstrate that your mother was an equal partner in the decisions regarding the trust fund. So they're turning on each other now, I said, feeling a deep sadness beneath my anger. What do you recommend? Let's use this to our advantage. If he's willing to provide evidence that strengthens our case, it could accelerate the settlement with your mother and the agency. The judge overseeing the case, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Harriet Monroe, made her opinion clear during a settlement conference with all parties. "This is one of the more troubling trust violations I've encountered," she stated, looking directly at my parents' lawyers. The trustees not only failed their fiduciary duty, but appear to have actively conspired to misappropriate funds designated for their daughter's future. Had this proceeded to trial, I would have viewed these actions most seriously. Her words seemed to finally penetrate my mother's denial. For the first time since the case began, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. The final settlement agreement included the following terms: full repayment of the misappropriated funds through the agency's refund, Amanda's contribution, and my mother's structured payment plan, a formal admission of breach of fiduciary duty by both parents, and mandatory financial counseling for my mother as a condition of the settlement. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges and to co-sign on a refinancing application for the family home, using some of the recovered funds as a down payment to lower the monthly payments to something my mother could afford on her teacher's salary. As Judge Monroe signed off on the agreement, she addressed me directly. "Miss Wright, I commend your courage in pursuing this matter. Many young people in your situation would have accepted the loss rather than confront their own parents. You've not only stood up for yourself, but potentially helped others by establishing this precedent." When the proceedings concluded, my mother approached me in the courthouse hallway, her eyes red from crying. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm truly sorry, Eden. I lost sight of what was right because I was so focused on what I wanted for Amanda, for all of us. I forgot that you deserved the same support and consideration." I didn't have a ready response. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound for easy forgiveness. But I recognized the first step toward something that might eventually become healing. "I need time," I told her honestly. "I can't pretend everything is okay now just because there's a legal settlement. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that will take years if it's possible at all." She nodded, accepting this boundary with a new humility. "I understand. I'll respect whatever you need." As I walked away from the courthouse that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The legal victory couldn't erase the pain of betrayal or instantly repair family relationships, but it represented an acknowledgement of the wrong done to me and a path toward restitution. More importantly, it marked my emergence as someone who could stand up for herself, who wouldn't allow others to determine her worth or control her future, even when those others were the very people who should have been her strongest advocates. The modeling agency had indeed learned the word chargeback. My parents had learned about consequences, and I had learned that sometimes justice requires us to fight even against those we love. The months following the settlement were a period of cautious reconstruction. With the legal battle behind me, I faced the challenge of rebuilding my life and determining what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my family moving forward. The first step was processing my anger. In the immediate aftermath of discovering the betrayal, rage had fueled me through the legal fight. But now, with that chapter closing, I needed to find a way to live without letting bitterness consume me. "Anger kept you going when you needed it," my therapist, Dr. Laura Bennett, explained during one of our weekly sessions. "It gave you the energy to fight for justice. But if you hold on to it indefinitely, it will burn you from the inside out." I had started therapy 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, recognizing that I needed professional help to navigate the complex emotions of family betrayal. Dr. Bennett specialized in family trauma and financial abuse terms I had never associated with my situation until she gently suggested them. "What happened to you was a form of financial abuse," she explained during our first session. "Your parents used their position of power and trust to appropriate resources that were rightfully yours. Understanding that can help you stop blaming yourself or questioning whether you overreacted." Those initial sessions were primarily focused on validating my experience and processing the immediate crisis. As the legal case progressed toward resolution, our work shifted toward longer-term healing and establishing healthier boundaries. "I'm afraid I'll never trust anyone again," I admitted during a particularly difficult session. "If my own parents could betray me like this, how can I trust a partner or friend?" "Trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition," Dr. Bennett replied. "You can learn to trust gradually, cautiously, based on people's actions, rather than their roles or promises. And you can trust yourself to recognize red flags earlier now." Financially, I was slowly getting back on track. The modeling agency's refund and Amanda's contribution gave me $12,000 to work with immediately. My mother's structured payments would eventually provide the remaining $8,000, though that would take several years. I adjusted my business plan to account for the reduced immediate capital. Instead of renting a studio space right away, I converted a corner of my apartment into a home office and focused on location photography. I invested in quality, but not top-of-the-line equipment, prioritizing versatility over specialization. Eden Wright Photography officially launched 3 months after the settlement. My website featured the tagline, "Capturing Authentic Moments," a philosophy that felt particularly meaningful given my family's history of appearances over substance. My first clients came through college connections and Aunt Jennifer's network. The work was varied from engagement photos to small business headshots, but each job built my portfolio and reputation. I particularly enjoyed working with nonprofit organizations, documenting their community events at reduced rates in exchange for exposure. By the 6-month mark, I was earning enough to cover my basic expenses, though not yet enough to save significantly. It wasn't the immediate success I had envisioned when planning with my full trust fund, but it was mine built through my own efforts despite the obstacles thrown in my path. My relationship with Amanda evolved in unexpected ways. Free from our parents' comparative framework, we discovered a genuine connection based on mutual support rather than competition. She had abandoned modeling entirely, enrolling in community college to study education, with plans to work with children who had learning differences. "I always hated modeling," she confessed during one of our monthly sister dinners. "The constant scrutiny, the rejection, being told I was too fat one day and too thin the next. I only stuck with it because Mom and Dad were so invested in it, literally and emotionally." "Why education?" I asked, genuinely curious about her choice. "Remember my reading tutor in third grade, Mrs. Hoffman? How she was the first person who didn't make me feel stupid because reading was hard for me." Amanda smiled at the memory. "I want to be that person for other kids. Someone who sees their actual needs, not what their parents want them to be." I recognized the healing in her choice, the reclamation of her own path, just as my photography represented mine. My relationship with my mother remained complicated. The settlement agreement required monthly in-person meetings to exchange payment checks, forcing regular contact that was initially tense and awkward. Over time, these brief encounters evolved into cautious conversations, primarily about practical matters, but occasionally touching on deeper issues. "I've been reading about narcissistic family systems," she said during one such meeting approximately 8 months after the settlement. "My therapist recommended some books. I see now how I participated in turning Amanda into the golden child and you into the responsible one. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am working to understand how it happened, so I don't repeat those patterns." These glimpses of self-awareness were encouraging, but I maintained firm boundaries. Our relationship might eventually heal to some degree, but it would never return to a naive trust. Any future connection would be built on clear expectations and demonstrated trustworthiness, not mere family obligation. My father was a more distant figure. After providing evidence for the settlement, he had returned to Arizona, occasionally calling my mother, but making no direct contact with me. Through Amanda, I learned he was working as a car salesman and had started dating someone new, apparently eager to begin a fresh chapter without addressing the damage he'd left behind. His absence was both a relief and a lingering wound. I didn't want to face him yet. His failure to even attempt amends confirmed the selfishness that had led to the betrayal in the first place. On the 1-year anniversary of my bank visit, the day I discovered the empty trust fund, I decided to do something meaningful with a portion of the recovered money. I established a small scholarship fund for young photographers, particularly those from families without financial support for their artistic pursuits. The Eden Wright Photography Scholarship wasn't large, just $1,000 annually, but it represented everything I had learned through my ordeal. It was a way to transform pain into purpose, to ensure that at least one aspiring photographer each year would receive the support that had been temporarily stolen from me. The first recipient was a talented high school senior named Jasmine, whose portfolio showed extraordinary promise, despite being shot entirely on a borrowed smartphone. Her thank you letter, describing how the scholarship would allow her to attend a summer photography program, brought me to tears. "Your support means more than just the money," she wrote. "It means someone believes in my vision when my own family thinks photography is just a hobby I should outgrow." As my business grew, I developed a specialty in what I called authentic portraiture, helping clients, particularly women, capture images that reflected their true selves rather than idealized versions. This approach was a direct response to the years of watching Amanda being molded and packaged for others' consumption. "I don't want to make you look perfect," I explained to clients. "I want to make you look real with all the character and complexity that makes you uniquely you." This philosophy resonated especially with clients who had spent years feeling inadequate compared to airbrush magazine images. My business card featured the slogan, "Beauty is in truth not perfection." And by the 18-month mark, I had saved enough to rent a small studio space in an artist collective sharing common areas with painters, sculptors, and other creative professionals. The environment was collaborative and inspiring worlds away from the competitive atmosphere of my childhood home. Throughout this period of rebuilding, I maintained contact with my grandparents, whose support never wavered despite their heartbreak over their son's actions. They visited my new studio, proudly displaying my photos in their home, and never mentioned my father unless I brought him up first. "We're so proud of how you've handled this terrible situation," my grandmother told me during one visit. "You've shown more integrity and strength than many people twice your age." Their validation helped heal some of the deeper wounds inflicted by my parents' betrayal. If the people who had known me my entire life could see my worth so clearly, perhaps I could fully believe in it myself. 2 years after the initial discovery, I received an unexpected email from the trust lawyer who had helped me through the case. She was working with a financial literacy nonprofit that wanted to create educational materials about trust fund protections for young adults. Would I be willing to share my story as a case study? After careful consideration, I agreed. My experience, though painful, could potentially help others avoid similar situations or recognize warning signs earlier. The case study, published with names changed, became part of a workshop series for college students approaching trust fund age. This opportunity led to an invitation to speak at a conference on financial literacy for young adults. Standing at the podium looking out at the audience of college-age students, I felt a sense of purpose that transcended my personal pain. "Trust funds aren't just about money," I told them. "They're about trust in the deepest sense of the word. When that trust is violated, the financial loss is only part of the damage. But I'm here to tell you that you can recover not just the money, but your sense of agency and self-worth." The journey from betrayal to empowerment wasn't linear. There were still days when anger resurfaced, when I questioned everything about my family relationships, when I struggled to trust new people in my life. But increasingly, those days were outnumbered by ones filled with creativity, connection, and confidence in my own path. I learned that family isn't simply defined by blood. My support network, including Aunt Jennifer, Dr. Bennett, friends who stood by me through the legal battle, and even clients who became mentors, formed a chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine care. I came to understand that while my parents' actions were partly about money, they were more fundamentally about control and the inability to see me as an individual with my own legitimate dreams. The trust fund became a symbol of that larger struggle for autonomy and recognition. Most importantly, I discovered that moving forward didn't require forgetting or minimizing what happened. I could acknowledge the betrayal, hold appropriate boundaries, and still build a meaningful life focused on my own values, rather than reaction to their choices. Today, Eden Wright Photography is a thriving business with a waiting list for portrait sessions. The scholarship fund has grown to support 3 young photographers annually. My relationship with Amanda is stronger than ever, built on mutual respect rather than competition. My mother continues to make monthly payments and attend therapy. We have coffee occasionally, our relationship cautiously evolving into something new that acknowledges our history without being defined by it. My father remains distant, a chapter in my life that may never find proper closure. The trust fund that was meant to launch my business ultimately taught me something more valuable than money could buy. It showed me my own resilience, the importance of standing up for myself, and the power of transforming pain into purpose. If I could go back and speak to my younger self waiting nervously in that bank office 2 years ago, I would tell her that the empty account she's about to discover will eventually fill her life with strength she never knew she possessed. That the betrayal, painful as it is, will lead to a more authentic life than she ever imagined. True security, I've learned, doesn't come from a bank balance. It comes from knowing your own worth and having the courage to protect it, even when those who should value it most try to diminish it instead. As I look toward the future, I no longer define myself by what was taken from me, but by what I've built in its place. A business, a purpose, a life guided by authenticity rather than appearances, and most importantly, the knowledge that no one can determine my value but me. How do you define family loyalty? Is it blindly supporting relatives no matter what they do, or is it holding loved ones accountable when necessary? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found my story meaningful, please give this video a like and subscribe to hear more journeys of overcoming family betrayal. And remember, sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most important victories. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to stand up for yourself when it matters most.